Welcome to my winter underbrush transparent watercolor tutorial. The photograph on the right was the inspiration for my painting on the left, winter underbrush. I've sketched my composition on my work surface, and I've decided that I'm going to include some masking in my painting process. There are two larger tree shapes in my composition, and I've decided that I want to mask around the exterior edges of these shapes so that I can put a fluid wash on the tree surface itself. To accomplish this, I'm going to make a frisket using clear packaging tape. I apply the packaging tape around the outer edge of the tree shape, and then I take a very sharp knife and I lightly cut along the outer edges of the shape that I want to mask. Once I have my tape applied and have cut around the shapes, I just take the tip of my knife and put it underneath the tape and begin to remove it from the areas that I want uncovered. Keep in mind that I'm actually masking the outer edge of these shapes, not masking over them. And now that I have the outer edges of these shapes masked, there are some areas on the inside edges of the shapes that I want to mask, and I'm using masking fluid for this, masking fluid pen. So there's some areas where there's some white highlights where there's going to be some snow, and I'm using a fine masking pen to protect these highlights. There's some linear branch shapes that I want to protect over top of this other tree shape, so I'm using the fine line masking pen in that area also. With all my masking done, I'm going to begin applying my wash. So I'm using a warm wash to indicate the side of the tree shape that's being hit by light, and I'm using a mixture of quinacridone and coral, quinacridone and gold, and I have a little bit of sap green mixed in to give some variation of the color. This is the warmer side of this tree shape, and now I'm going to come back in and I'm going to use a cooler mixture, which is a mixture of burnt sienna and ultramarine blue. And I've mixed almost a neutral to indicate the shadow side of this tree shape. This is a very fluid wash, and it's a very smooth wash, and it's got gradated color. It's a pretty steady value, and when working with a subject such as a tree, sometimes you want a little bit more texture. So there's many ways to do it, but one way to get texture in a wash like this is to put a little bit of salt in it. It's not a technique that I use very often, but there are times when I use it because it's going to give me the result that I'm after and a nice textural quality. I'm always hesitant when talking about some of these techniques that you can employ to give you special effects, because sometimes people take it too far and get just gimmicky with it. I only use it when it's going to give me the specific result that I'm after. So while this wash is still very wet, I shake some of this coarse salt into the wash, and it will create a nice textural effect in the glaze. And now that that's done and it's drying, I'm going to start working on this other tree shape. And this is almost a green gray that I'm applying on this tree, and it's some sap green with some ultramarine blue and burnt sienna. On the shadow side, I'm applying more of a gray that has a stronger hint of ultramarine blue in it and is a bit cooler. I'm coming in with a little darker value neutral. Again, this is a mixture of ultramarine blue and burnt sienna. I want to get some more texture in this tree, but a little different than in the previous one. This birch, they have some kind of linear markings in the bark. So I'm taking this plastic card, and the paint is still wet. It's not real fluid. It's dried to a point where it still has a sheen. And I just take the edge of this plastic scraper and I scrape some of these kind of linear markings in the bark. And while I'm doing it, I'm trying to contour the roundness of the tree a little bit. And anytime you can paint some of the contour on a surface, it helps better define the shape and give it some volume. And my other tree shape is still damp. And I'm going to take that plastic scraper and I'm going to give the indication of the texture in the bark on this tree, making linear markings. So you can't really do this when you've just applied the wash, and you can't do it when it's completely dry. It's somewhere in the middle there. The best way I can describe it is the paper has a sheen to it, but it's not completely dry. So you can still push and move the paint. What I'm doing here is I'm moving the paint. I'm not scraping into the paper. I'm coming in with a much darker value neutral. It's a darker mixture of ultramarine blue and burnt sienna with a little bit of sepia in it. And I'm using this to give it a stronger shadow side to this tree. You'll notice that as I put this paint down, I'm using a 1-inch flat brush, and I'm using the side of the brush and kind of dragging it for a lot of this. And I use it as you normally would with a normal brush stroke, but I'm using a variety of edges of the brush as I apply this. I've applied a fairly dark wash on the shadow side of the tree on the left, and now I'm coming in with a darker tone and applying it to the tree shape on the right. And you can see where I'm getting resistance where I've applied my masking fluid to indicate where some of the branches are going to cross in front of this tree shape. Now I want to start working on the whole composition here. So I'm removing my frisket, or this clear packing tape, and then I'm going to start to work with the whole composition. This is an unusual way for me to start a painting. I normally start with a general glaze over the whole composition. I don't normally isolate two shapes like this, but for this composition I felt they were significant enough and had enough going on that I would take this approach. I'm also going to remove the dried liquid masking fluid that I applied at the start of this painting. I'm going to begin my overall painting by starting to work in the shadowed areas of the snow. So I'm using a 1-inch flat brush, and I have a mixture of ultramarine blue with touches of cobalt blue and some quinacridone rose madder mixed in. So you can see there's a brighter cobalt blue there, and to the left it's a little bit more purplish. It has some rose madder mixed in. So I'm just giving the indication of the shadowed snow, and I'm painting over top of some of these branch shapes, and it doesn't bother me because I know I'm going to be putting a darker value over some of those areas. And I'm coming in with a fine mist spray bottle just to soften those edges and help diffuse the color. I want a little bit of texture, so I'm tapping my brush against my finger and just splattering some of this paint just to give some texture to the composition. Here I'm continuing with more of the same. I've applied this color mixture in a number of areas across the composition, and I've used this spray bottle to soften the edges. And again, I want to develop a little bit more texture, so I'm going to take the loaded brush with some of this tone, and I'm going to splatter it in a number of areas of the composition. Next, I'm going to begin to work on some of the darker value shapes in the tree and in the branches. So this is a mixture of ultramarine blue, burnt sienna with some sepia in it, and at times I add some royal blue to help darken it and give it a cooler tone. There's a lot of brushwork to be done with these linear branch shapes. This is a very thick underbrush at the base of this tree, and there's a lot of overlapping linear shapes. Here I'm continuing more of this brushwork, and you can see that this isn't all one tone or one color or one value. There's areas where I have a little bit more burnt sienna coming through. There's some areas where I put a touch of sap green in, and other areas where I have a little bit of blue. So I try and mix these tones up. Even though they're fairly dark value, there's still some gradation going on of color. Starting to work on some of these larger branch shapes on the other side of my composition, still using the same colors and still working in the darker value. And on some of this I apply just a clear wash of water and then let the paint flow down a little bit and mix the colors up and let them mingle and mix on the paper. Here I'm taking a very dark value mixture with royal blue and sepia and a little bit of burnt sienna in there, and I'm just giving the indication of a branch peeking through the snow. So I've done quite a bit of very similar brushwork to get to this point using the same values and colors, and the video itself is abbreviated a little bit because it gets monotonous watching a lot of this same painting over and over, but it's the same technique and same approach as I've applied this across the composition. I'm working with a quill brush, has a very fine point, and I'm working with a very dark value, and I'm moving around the composition, putting in the indication of some of these twigs and sticks, and there's areas that go behind other linear shapes, and it creates overlap, helps create depth to this whole composition. I want to give some more texture to the to the bark of this tree, and I'm starting to do that using this quill brush and being very deliberate in painting this texture on. However, it's probably not the most effective way to do it, and I'm better off using a flat brush and dragging along the side of the flat brush. So I'm going to change my brush. I'm going to take this 1/2 inch flat brush with this darker value, and I'm just dragging the edge of my, or the side of my brush along the surface, so it's a dry brush effect, and it gives me a nice textural quality that gives the indication and the suggestion of bark. I've talked in some of my other videos about getting the most out of your brush. You can use all the edges on a brush to apply the paint. So here I have a 1/2 inch flat brush, and you can do much more than just paint a 1/2 inch line with it. So I use the corner and I use the edge, I'll use the tip, and it works nice for this dry brush effect, and it gives a nice random feeling to the texture that's given the suggestion of the bark. I'm taking a very dark value, and I'm at a point where I'm being very deliberate with the application of my paint. I'm giving the suggestion of pieces of branch and twig and sticks peeking out from underneath the snow. And I'll do this in a number of areas of the composition. I'm going to take a darker value and working on the edge of this tree a little bit, just to make that a deeper shadow on that shadowed side of the tree. There's some dried up leaf shapes that are hanging in the branches here, so I'm taking this very dark value mixture, and I'm just giving the suggestion of these leaves that are just still hanging on these branches in the snow. I want the underbrush here to be just a little thicker, more active in this area of my painting, so I'm just randomly coming in here and putting these sticks and twig shapes with my quill brush and a very dark value. So I'm at a point where I'm putting some finishing touches on. I'm adding a few twigs here and there and some sticks, and I've got a rigger brush that I'm applying this paint with. It's just a darker value, middle to dark value, and I'm working it across various areas of the composition. I want to get a little bit more activity in a few of the areas here where it's already pretty thick, but I just want a couple more linear shapes in here. I want to deepen these shadows a little bit, so I'm coming in with a darker bluish tone of cobalt and some ultramarine blue, and just adding a few touches here and there to deepen the shadows. That's my painting, Winter Underbrush. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching.